Hi ladies and gentlemen, it's Mrs. Wifter and we're going to talk today about annotated bibliographies. We'll talk about the purpose of an annotated bibliography as well as the specifics of this assignment. You will need three things before we get started: the small rubric, the sample annotated bibliography, and a writing utensil so you can take notes throughout the presentation. First of all, let's talk about the purpose of an annotated bibliography. It's important that you are thinking critically about information sources. There are lots of media that are coming at you on a daily basis, and you need to be able to evaluate the information in those media sources to decide what to buy into. Sometimes that will mean evaluating something to see if it's appropriate for a school project. Other times it will be considering whether or not information in perhaps an email from a friend is something that's believable. The ideas and the skills that are provided here are intended for you to build a thought process for evaluating information of all kinds to decide whether or not you want to use it for whatever purpose you have intended. An annotated bibliography essentially looks like a works cited page with short paragraphs inserted under each citation. For this assignment, you'll select three sources that you've used in the research process, which means you'll have three citations within your annotated bibliography, and under each citation, you'll have an annotation. Each annotation will include a brief description of the content of a source, discussion of the purpose of that source, and an evaluation of the quality and presentation of the information within the source. Each annotation will also include an assessment of the author or publishers of the source. On the screen, you'll see a definition for an annotated bibliography, and within the definition there are a couple of things I want you to notice. First is this sentence: each citation is followed by a brief descriptive and evaluative paragraph. Later on it says annotations are descriptive and critical, which means there's essentially two parts to an annotated bibliography. There is one part that describes the content of the source and the other part that evaluates the source. The first thing I want you to focus on here is the brief description. The description of the content within the source must be brief. By brief, I mean one sentence long. The most common error students make is writing a paragraph summary about the information in an article or on a web page. A paragraph summary is not an annotation. It's simply that, a summary. And for an evaluative annotation like this, that is not what I want to see. I want to see, and please write this down, one single sentence summarizing the information found in the source, whether it be an article or a chapter in a reference book or an entire website. Then you'll begin the evaluation of the source. You'll consider the relevance of the source to your research, the accuracy of the information as compared to information found in other sources, the author's point of view, and the authority of the author. It's critical to consider who's putting information out there and why you should believe them. If you turn over the little rubric, you'll find a list of questions you can answer for any source. These aren't the only questions that you can address in an annotation, but for this assignment, they provide a really good start. Let's go over each quickly. The first important question to consider is what kind of source is it, and what does it tell you about the information within the source. Regardless of the kind of source it is, you need to state explicitly in the annotation whether it's a newspaper article or a website or a professional journal article from a database. This might seem really obvious, and I will be able to tell what kind of source it is from the citation. However, I need to know that you know what it is. In the past, I've had students, for example, who would continually refer to a website in their annotation, the information on the website, the author of the website, but from their citation, I could tell what they were talking about was actually an article from a database. They were assuming that if it was found online, it was a website, and that is simply not the case. If you are accessing information through a database like Opposing Viewpoints in Context or one of the MEL databases, then you need to state that it is an article from the database, a reference book from the database, etc. If it's a website, you will have accessed it from a search engine like a Google or Yahoo search, and you should state that accordingly in your annotation. In addition to stating what kind of source it is, you may elaborate on what that indicates. For example, if you're talking about a reference source, you should realize that it's been edited and revised heavily, and there are certain assumptions that you can make about the accuracy of information in a reference source. If it's a popular magazine, you might want to consider what the purpose for that article is, which is probably to entertain, and therefore consider what that might mean for the quality of information found there. The next question is, what is the purpose of the source? For every information source that you encounter, you need to decide, is the author just trying to provide information for you? Are they looking to educate you? Do they want to convince you of something? Are they trying to sell you something? Will be different for all types of information sources, and you'll have to determine that as the reader. The next piece is to consider the intended audience. For example, an academic journal for a nurse might have information in it that would be helpful to a mother with a sick kid. However, the article was not written for that mother, it was written for a nurse. And that will affect the vocabulary, the scope of the information, the technical quality, etc. The next item is whether or not you can find anything out about the author. Sometimes the author is a single person, sometimes the author is a group or organization. You'll want to Google the person or the organization and find out what their education, their work history, personal experiences are. What have they written before? If it's an organization, what is their mission statement? If you can't find anything about the author, then you need to say that in your annotation. The authority of the person who wrote or published the information is really important, as is the point of view of that person or group. I'll give you an example of an author, Arthur Butts. He writes extensively on Holocaust revisionism, which is the denial of the Holocaust. And when you Google Arthur Butts, you'll find out that he is an instructor at a university, but his degree is actually in electrical engineering. He doesn't have any training in history or social sciences. So clearly he is an educated person and probably a smart man, but he does not have the authority to write about the things he's writing about. This would be like me writing about physical education or Mr. Woofter writing about library services. You don't write outside your area of expertise, particularly for serious academic literature. The exception for this would be a journalist who probably builds a reputation on writing in a lot of different areas. But you can find out things about journalists, like their body of work, their employment history, and that will provide you some evaluative information to discuss a journalist. The other issue with Arthur Butts was that when you Googled him, you found that he was connected to a lot of white supremacist sites, which indicated that he had a personal agenda beyond just informing the reader about Holocaust revisionism. The next thing is to consider whether or not there are any unique features. Does the article include data, charts? Are there pictures? Does it include an interview? There might be any number of things there. So if there's something interesting, different than text that you encounter, you should mention that in your annotation. And then the last thing that's really important is whether or not there's any bias that's obvious or not so obvious. And if so, where and why you see that bias. So sometimes the bias is obvious. You'd be able to tell from inflammatory language or sarcasm or manipulation of information or leaving out information that should be there. Sometimes it's a lot less obvious. Always consider, for example, organizations and whether or not there is a specific mission. An organization with an explicit and impassioned mission implies that there might be potential for bias, and you just need to keep your eyes open for that, be aware, and mention that in your annotation. If one of your citations and annotations is about an interview subject, you'll consider many of the same questions. For example, you do need to know some things about the interview subject. You need to know their education and their work background. Don't be embarrassed to ask those questions. You need to know the purpose of them having a conversation with you. Is it just to inform you, to provide information for your project, or are they trying to convince you of something? And also consider whether or not there's any bias. You may have picked this person because they are very passionate about this topic. And so consider whether or not that affects the information that they provide you. I will tell you that if you can avoid using your interview subject for your annotated bibliography, that would be a good idea. The weakest annotations that I come across are consistently those for interview subjects. So just be aware when you're selecting the 3 sources. We're going to look at the sample annotated bibliography. So let me flip over to that screen real quickly, and we'll talk about particularly the layout. First of all, you'll see on the sample annotated bibliography that you have that there is a thesis statement. You do need to include your working thesis. It provides some context for me. Don't think that this needs to be your final thesis statement for your paper. This is just a work in progress, and this is more for my information. The next thing you should see is that there are citations for each of the sources. The citations need to be in correct MLA format, which means that they're double-spaced and reverse indented. And then for each source, there is an annotation. The annotations are single-spaced paragraphs. The boxes along the sides give more ideas about information that can be included in an annotation. For each annotation, you should have included a single sentence of summary. You should have addressed all the questions on the back of the rubric, and you should have checked the boxes on this page to verify that you've addressed any other issues that are relevant to the source. On the other side, you'll find student samples of annotations for a variety of different sources, and these are all decent annotations. They're not perfect, but they're not bad. I do want you to take some time and read them over, considering what these students did well and what you would have done differently. And finally, we'll look at the rubric. Two things that I'll stress again here is, first of all, the use of correct MLA citation, and the second is that the document be free of errors. If you don't use correct MLA format at all, if you make up your own style or you just cut and paste a web address into the citation, I will not grade your annotated bibliography. Also, your document should not have errors. I'll expect that you edit it, that you run it through spell check, that you use the online tools that you need to create citations. If your document is full of errors, I won't grade it. I do expect senior level work, and if I don't get that, I will give your annotated bibliography back to you so that you can fix it, but your grade will be reduced each day that it takes you to make the correction. And finally, I need you to email a sample annotation to me. Your teacher will provide you with a date by which you must send me a sample. You can send me one annotation or all your annotations. I'll provide feedback on everything that I get. The more you send me, the better. You'll be able to make more corrections before you turn your final draft in. The difference between sending an annotated bibliography or using the feedback that you get from me can be the difference between an A or a B on an annotated bibliography, or a D or an E on the annotated bibliography. This is very important and something that you should not skip doing. You can email me at either of the addresses provided below, or share your annotated bibliography in a Google Doc. Just make sure that I get an email notification. Your teacher will also provide a due date for your final draft. You'll need to print and staple the rubric to the top right corner. Turn the annotated bibliography into your teacher. I'll collect them, grade them, and return them to your teacher so they can be returned to you. Good luck. If you have any questions, you know where to find me in the library, or email me. I'll be happy to help, and I'll look forward to seeing all your sample annotations soon.